Hello again, champions. It's Mr. Chambers coming here to read chapters 2 and 3 of Powerless. Last time we read the prologue in chapter 1. Today we're reading 2 more chapters. And what I want you to do for this reading is I'd like you to identify the conflicts or the problems happening to our protagonist, our main character, Daniel. What kind of problems or issues is he having as he's moving into this new town? Okay, so that's what I'd like for you to answer in a short paragraph when we're done, but identify what kind of conflicts are happening to Daniel, our protagonist. So, Powerless by Matthew Cody, published by Scholastic Books. Chapter 2, The Bus Stop. The only thing worse than your first day in a new town, thought Daniel, is your first day in a new school, in a new town. On that morning, his parents offered to drive him, but Daniel knew it was hard enough being the new kid without getting chauffeured around by your parents. He knew better than to give it in to the butterflies in his stomach. The first day at a new school was like the first swim in a cold lake. It was better to just dive in and get the initial shock over with. So after a quick breakfast, Daniel grabbed his brand new backpack and walked bravely to the bus stop at the end of Elm Lane. As he waited, he tried to distract himself by reflecting on the mysterious Molly Lee. It had been several days since their strange meeting, and he hadn't seen so much as a glimpse of her since then. No matter how many times he replayed the scene in his head, he could not figure out how Molly had gotten into the street and rescued Georgie from that oncoming car, then returned to her original spot that fast, and all without Daniel seeing a thing. As something of an amateur sleuth, Daniel had carefully worked out 3 possible explanations. The first, and most likely, if least interesting solution, was that Daniel was just flat out wrong. That when he thought he'd seen Georgie run out into the street, he had simply been mistaken. Perhaps it was just Georgie's big blue ball that rolled out there, and Daniel mistook that flash of color for his brother. The only problem with that was that Daniel had clearly seen Georgie run out into the street. Which brought Daniel to the next and somewhat more interesting possibility. He was going insane. Perhaps he had contracted some kind of rare tropical brain fever like in the Sherlock Holmes story, The Adventure of the Dying Detective. And now he was seeing things. The upside of brain fever would be that you probably got to miss a lot of school. But the downside was, well, you had brain fever. That couldn't be all that fun. And the fact that other than this one little hallucination, Daniel felt pretty much ruled out the rare disease theory. Which left explanation number 3, by far the most exciting one. That somehow Molly really had been quick enough to run over and save Georgie from that oncoming car, and then carry him back, all before Daniel could take a single step. Either she was that fast, or she made it appear she was that fast. Perhaps Daniel was the victim of some kind of crazy practical joke. In the Holmes stories, anything that defied explanation or seemed in some way supernatural was always a hoax. Whatever the answer, all the evidence told him there was something very interesting about Molly, not the least of which was the sight of her standing right in front of him. He'd been so wrapped up in his thoughts that he hadn't even seen her approach. Some detective. Molly looked to be wearing the same pair of dirty jeans as before, though Daniel suspected that all of her jeans looked this way, since she didn't seem the type to let a good pair of jeans go undirtied. Standing next to her was a small boy, about their age, but a good several inches shorter. He was wearing a pair of thick glasses and a little boy-sized tie. In stark contrast to Molly, the way this boy was dressed reminded Daniel more of a tiny adult than a kid. Molly nudged the boy in the ribs. "Rohan, look, it's the new kid I told you about." The short boy stared at Daniel, squinting at him from behind bottle-thick lenses. Daniel waved at him. Rohan looked back at Molly. "Seems perfectly nice to me." "I liked his brother better," she said. "I thought you said his brother was like 2. "Yep," she answered. "Exactly." Daniel found this talking about him as if he wasn't their thing very unsettling. "Daniel," he said. "Excuse me," asked Rohan. "Daniel, my name's Daniel, not new kid." "Whatever," Molly smirked. "Oh," said Rohan, blinking. "Of course. Pleased to meet you, Daniel." This Rohan kid even talked like a little adult, and sure enough, the next minute he was shaking Daniel's hand, a firm, professional handshake. "Don't mind Molly," said Rohan, smiling big. "She's a bit territorial, and she doesn't like it when new people show up in her neighborhood. Bears are like that too, you know. Big, stupid bears." Molly just rolled her eyes and snorted, but it made Daniel relax a little to see Rohan poking fun at her without getting hit. Rohan stopped, sniffing the air. He made a face. "Uh-oh." "Speaking of big and stupid," said Molly, pointing to something coming down the street. Daniel turned to see 2 rough-looking boys walking toward them. Something about them just said, trouble. It was the way they walked, maybe, or the fact that they weren't carrying book bags, or books at all for that matter. They just looked tough, like the kind of boys who planned to pay for lunch with someone else's money. "Crud," said Rohan. "It's Clay Cudgeons. He and Bud must have missed the bus and decided to hike up here to our stop. Or they decided to start their day off with a little fun," said Molly. "Watch yourself around those 2, new kid." "Yeah," echoed Rohan. "Same goes for all of us." For some reason, Rohan had put on a nose clip, the kind that you wear before swimming. Daniel had never seen a sillier sight than little Rohan standing there wearing a tie and a nose clip, but he didn't have the time to comment on it because Clay and Bud were upon them. "Well, looky here! It's Molly and her girlfriend, Rohan," shouted one of the boys. Physically, he was the skinnier of the 2, but something in the look of his eyes said that he was definitely the meaner. He was wearing a grotesque concert t-shirt decorated with skulls and decapitated bodies. His enormous friend shirt was plain except for the word Bud, which was stenciled unevenly on the front. Daniel heard Rohan whispering to Molly, "Just ignore them all." But Molly didn't look as if she were about to go along with Rohan's plan. Daniel could practically hear her teeth grinding together. "Aw, yeah, Clay," said Bud. "Rohan is Molly's girlfriend because Rohan is such a girl. Good one, man." Bud's arms were a little too thick and his head was a little too small. He looked like a bald ape with a Twinkies problem. Then there was the smell. This Bud character stank. At first, Daniel wondered if there was some kind of roadkill nearby or perhaps an open sewer, but before long he realized that the stink was coming off Bud. The kid had a stench that went way beyond regular body odor. It smelled like rotten garbage. If you buried it in a pile of raw fish, then left it out in the sun in summer, somewhere in the land of stink. Rohan and Molly were openly covering their noses. Daniel now wished he had a ridiculous-looking nose clip of his own. Even Clay seemed to have had all he could take of his friend's smell. "Yo, Bud, stand downwind, man. You're gonna make me lose my breakfast," said Clay. "Sorry, dude. It gets worse when I get excited," said Bud, as he stepped back a few feet from the rest of them. "So," said Clay, sizing up Daniel, "who's this?" Daniel's legs turned soft and jelly-like as Clay's beady eyes focused on him. It was like being looked at by a strange, mangy dog. You don't trust it, and you don't dare turn your back on it, so you just stand there, frozen. Daniel had once read that when facing a wild animal, you should never show fear because animals can smell weakness, and it only makes them hungrier. Bolstering his courage, he took a deep breath and answered, "My name's, oh no. Had he just forgotten his own name? I'm the new kid," said Daniel, sounding just like lunch. "His name's Daniel," answered Molly, much to Daniel's surprise. "Daniel, huh?" Clay sneered as he stepped closer. He was a good several inches taller than Daniel. "So are these your new best friends, Daniel? A crazy Buddha and a girl?" "I'm Hindu, not Buddhist," Rohan chirped. "Shut up. No one's talking to you," said Bud from several feet away. "So what's the story, new kid?" asked Clay, putting one of his long arms around Daniel's shoulders. "Are these losers your friends, or what?" Daniel immediately recognized what was going on. Clay was giving him a choice. In Clay's eyes, Daniel was a blank slate, a new kid with no allegiances. He could become friends with anyone, with Rohan, Molly, a couple of bullies like Clay and Bud. Trouble was, in order to befriend a bully, you had to become one. Daniel was going to have to go with the short kid and the tomboy. "Yeah," he said, gesturing to Molly and Rohan. "I guess they are my friends." Clay's eyes narrowed to tiny slits. "Too bad for you, new kid." He said, "Just for that, I think I'll take that nice new backpack you're wearing. I left mine at home." Clay gave Daniel's backpack a little tug. Daniel held firm. He knew he wasn't a match for these two, but that didn't mean he was going to give in this easy. "Come on, new kid," said Bud, leering. "You don't want to get hurt, do you?" Still, Daniel would not let go. He wasn't a fighter, but if he gave up now, these two would hound him for the rest of the year. Daniel had no intention of being marked as an easy target. An ugly look crept over Clay's face. "Warned you." Clay pulled again, only this time much harder, impossibly hard. Daniel felt his feet leave the ground, and when his head finally stopped spinning, he realized that Clay had thrown him 12 feet, at least. This boy was stronger than a grown man, stronger than 10 grown men. Molly came to his rescue. Daniel didn't even see her move, but there she was, standing face to face with Clay, yelling at him to return Daniel's backpack. Bud began giggling like a hyena, and the air grew thick with his stench. Daniel was bruised up a bit, and his head was still ringing from being thrown around like a rag doll, but he wasn't about to sit by and let Molly fight this fight for him, no matter how strong Clay might be. "I can handle this," said Daniel, getting to his feet. "Give me back my bag, Clay." "Oh, the new kid's a scrapper, huh?" said Clay, looking over Molly's head. "Okay, tell you what, if you can take this backpack from me, you can have it. I'll even let you have the first punch. Bud, grab me one of those rocks." Bud reached down and picked up a fist-sized rock from the side of the road. Daniel swallowed hard. A rock like that could seriously hurt someone, or worse. "Give it to him," said Clay. Bud tossed the rock to Daniel, who caught it awkwardly with both hands. What was this kid up to? Was he crazy? "Okay, give me your best shot." Daniel hesitated, staring at the heavy rock in his hands. "Come on, Daniel. I've even given you a weapon. Hit me as hard as you can." Daniel felt sick to his stomach as Clay smiled a wicked smile. "Of course, then it will be my turn," said Clay, "but I promise I'll only use my fist." "This is turning very serious." "That's enough, Clay," shouted Molly. This is none of your business, Molly, answered Clay evenly. It's between me and Daniel here. I'm making it my business, said Molly through clenched teeth. He lives on my block, so I'm going to look out for him. Give him his backpack now. Clay paused. There was a flash of something, almost like worry came across his face, and Bud was no longer laughing. Then Clay spat on the ground in front of Molly. Fine. You want to get into it too? I've been waiting for this day for a long time. Let's see how fast you are, little girl. Clay took a step forward and balled his hands into fists. Molly stood firm, but Daniel could see the fear in her eyes. There had to be some way to stop this. It was Rohan who broke it up. He stepped between the two of them and tapped Clay on the arm. Rohan calmly looked up at the towering Clay and said, Clay, if you hurt Molly, Eric will hear about it. You know he will. Are you prepared to get into it with him too? Clay glared down at Rohan, his face red with anger and the veins in his temple ready to burst. He looked as if he wanted nothing more than to smash everything in sight. But he didn't. Instead, he put his fist down, tossed Daniel his backpack, and cursed under his breath. Have it your way, he said. But no one stays a kid forever, not even Eric. I promise you, very soon, things in this town are gonna change. Then you'll all get what's coming to you. You too, new kid. Congrats, you just made my enemies list. With that, Clay stalked off down the road. Bud looked around anxiously and called, But Clay, we'll miss the bus again. It's the last stop, and we'll miss school. Dude, my mom will kill me. Clay kept walking, saying nothing. Bud stood there for a few more seconds before chasing after him, taking the cloud of foulness with him. Molly and Rohan watched them go in silence. Daniel wanted to shout or laugh or something, but the other two seemed so deep in thought, so full of worry that he didn't say anything. He just waited for that bus with his new friends, a million questions swirling around in his head. Chapter 3. The Bridge. There was definitely something a little strange about the kids of Noble's Green. Daniel had seen girls stand up to bullies before, but that was usually because they were armed with the knowledge that the bully wouldn't hit a girl. But Clay had been ready to fight Molly, girl or not, and she looked ready for it. She had been willing to stick up for Daniel, someone she barely knew, even if it meant tussling with someone as strong as Clay Cudgens. Sitting in his new homeroom class on his first day at school, Daniel wished he were half as bold as Molly Lee. He felt the stares of his new classmates, and all the attention was making him wish he could just disappear beneath his desk. Daniel had never considered himself a brave person to begin with, and he used up what little reserve of courage he had with Clay that morning. He was in full coward mode now. Hey, Daniel. He turned in his seat and saw Rohan sitting down at the desk next to him. To see a familiar face, even one he'd only met an hour ago, was an immeasurable relief. Listen, at recess, do you want me to show you around? Keep you from wandering into the elementary schoolers' yard, stuff like that? I feel bad about what happened earlier, and I'd like to prove that this place isn't always like that. Okay, thanks, I guess. You see, Noble's Green is a really small town, and great as it is, it's more of a place that people move away from, not to. Understand? Kind of. Rohan's face broke out in a silly grin. You know, you're almost a celebrity. A lot of good it did me so far. I wouldn't call getting knocked on your butt the celebrity treatment. A couple of girls a few seats over looked Daniel's way and started to giggle. Suddenly, he longed to be back at the bus stop facing Clay and Bud. Getting beaten up, he could handle, but the whole girl thing? It was just too gruesome. "Hey," Daniel said quietly, interrupting Rohan's speech. "On the shortest route to the bathroom, tell me something. Just how strong is Clay?" Rohan shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, he's pretty strong." "Yeah, I was on the receiving end of that. He's what, 12? 13? "He just turned 12, said Rohan quickly. "Okay," said Daniel. "My point is he tossed me straight up into the air. A grown man couldn't throw me like that." Rohan shook his head. No. You must have hit your head or something. From what I saw, he only shoved you a little. Your feet never left the ground." He was lying, and doing it badly. What's more, the whole conversation was obviously making him very uncomfortable. He kept stealing glances over his shoulder and had lowered his voice. Daniel was onto something. His detective sense was tingling. "Look, I didn't imagine it. He tossed me around like a sack of potatoes." "It's impossible, Daniel. It's like you said, no one's that strong. No one." "Rohan Parmar, do you have something you'd like to share with the rest of the class? Considering that it is 9 o'clock, class has started, and you are for some reason still talking?" Mr. Snyder, Daniel's new homeroom teacher, had appeared at the front of the class. Daniel had taken an immediate dislike to him. Although he'd been perfectly nice to Daniel when they'd met earlier, there was something in the way he looked at you that just seemed mean. He held his nose a little too high in the air and squinted a little too hard. "Oh, no, sir, Mr. Snyder. I was just telling Daniel here how to get around." "Well, while I'm sure that Daniel appreciates your hospitality, please save the tour guide act for after class." "Yes, sir." "Well, now that I have the floor in my own class, I would like to welcome our newest student, Mr. Daniel Corrigan. Daniel has come all the way from Philadelphia to our little town. I trust that you will all make him feel welcome. Now, if you would please open your textbooks, we are going to begin with a little review of statistical graphs." As Daniel cracked open his book, he was relieved to see that the rest of his class had apparently already grown bored with him and were now focused, painfully, on the lesson at hand, all except for Molly Lee. He spied her near the front of the class, giving him a sideways stare, her face unreadable. Daniel sank even lower in his seat, his chin nearly level with the top of his desk. Any lower and he'd melt into the floor. At that moment, the classroom door flew open and something came through. It was roughly boy-shaped, but this thing was soaking wet and covered in filth. Its clothes were streaked with mud, and it smelled like the bottom of a lake. And it was smiling a big, bright smile. For a moment, no one said anything. "Eric Johnson," Mr. Snyder said finally. "What? How dare? For goodness sake, boy, you are soaking wet." The boy wrung a bit of greenish water from his shirt. "Yeah, about that. Had a little spill on the way here, but I made it on time, didn't I?" Class broke out in a fit of giggles. Everyone, Daniel noticed, except Molly and Rohan. They saw that what was coming. Mr. Snyder's face turned purple with rage. "In fact, Mr. Johnson, you are late, and you will not be let into my class looking like that." "I'm really sorry, Mr. Snyder. I'll go and change into my gym clothes. And then you will go to the principal's office. You will not come back here." "But Mr. Snyder, I tried to get here on time. I really did. And again, you failed. I'd call your mother and have her come pick you up, but that would be a waste of time, wouldn't it?" When Eric answered, it was a little more than a whisper. Any hint of a smile was gone, and his mouth hardened into a solid line. My mom's at work. Of course she is. Now Mr. Snyder smiled, but there wasn't any warmth in it. In that one grin, he confirmed all of Daniel's earlier misgivings about him. Mr. Snyder was just another bully. Now off to the principal's office with you. I don't want to hear another word. Eric turned and headed for the door. Then Daniel saw his mouth something to Molly. It looked as if he were saying, tangled leak? Daniel wished he were better at reading lips. Now where were we? Said Mr. Snyder, smiling once again. Ah, yes, statistical graphs. The next morning, Daniel played with his cereal as pieces of a puzzle whirled around in his brain, but he couldn't fit them anywhere. He looked up only when his father let out one of his low whistles that usually meant that was a doozy. His parents were discussing something in the paper. It's darn lucky no one was seriously hurt, Graham was saying. Really is a miracle, said his mother. Not quite a miracle, said Daniel's father, looking at the paper. It says here that the police suspect that the couple was actually rescued by a passerby. The driver of the car had vague memories of being pulled out of the car and lifted from the bottom of the river. Can you believe that? Graham shook her head. They should have condemned that thing years ago. I've always said that the Tangle Creek Bridge is nothing but a death trap. Graham kept talking, but Daniel was no longer listening. He was picturing Eric standing there in his dripping clothes and smiling, that big, proud smile. A piece of the puzzle popped into place. Tangle Creek Bridge. So that will conclude our reading of chapters 2 and 3 for today. As a reminder, what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to, in a short paragraph, 3 to 5 sentences, identify the conflicts or the problems happening to our protagonist, Daniel. Okay, what kind of problems did he run into in these couple chapters? What kind of problems do you think he might see? Do you have any ideas or hints about what might be happening here in Nobles Creek or in the story of Powerless? Okay, take some time, write that down, leave it in the comments or in Class Dojo, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you, and goodbye.